Welcome to another episode of the Impossible Life Podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Surface, and I'm looking across at a man with standards so high, even his blood type is A++. That's right, friends, the former Navy SEAL. Garrett Unkelbach, a man who won't tolerate mediocrity from any cell in his body.
I love that.
Yeah. If you don't know, there's no such thing as A positive blood type, only A positive.
My blood type's O positive, but
Is it really?
Now I kind of wish my blood type was A plus.
A++?
Double positive.
Isn't O positive like the one that can go with any blood type?
That's O negative is the universal donor.
Right.
AB positive is the universal receiver.
Interesting.
See that you paid attention in school.
Dude, okay, anyways, I was going to bite on that, but I'm not going to. Nor am I going to reveal my blood type because it's strong like bull. Anyways, today's episode is, man, if I will say that this episode today, we're going to be talking about standards. We're going to be talking about 3 levels of standards and how to lead at each level, how to raise them. And really, this is like if you care about the cultivating an environment of excellence, whether it's in your family, your business, your church, or any area, and I'm guessing if you listen to this podcast that you do care about that, this is an episode that is literally so packed. I'm looking forward to seeing how we fit it all in one because there's a lot of meat on the bones today, G. Is that fair?
That is fair.
So to show just how important that is, I'm not even going to crack any jokes right now. I'm just gonna get straight into it.
Are you sure? Sure you can do that?
I mean, that's how important this is, G. And no, I'm not sure I can do that. Okay, so the great thing about this is, guys, and I say this all the time, but the SEAL teams are to me the best example of standards in the world. I don't that I know of. There may be something else out there that's higher, but just from having really clear standards, drawn and attached to purpose, and having a no compromise, and we could go into all the stories about how other special forces have done that, but we're not going to.
And they have a purpose for it.
That's what I said.
They have a purpose for
Massive.
why their standards are so high. And we've talked about standards before, and you have to link them. You have to connect them with a purpose. If you're all standards and no purpose, you're just like a grind factory.
Right.
And people aren't going to want to be a part of that process. In the SEAL teams, they could say meet the standard or go away because they were serving a great cause, which required a very high standard.
Right. And we actually did a podcast, which I'll link to. I'm going to link to a couple podcasts in the show notes today on winning culture, which I got to say I think is a absolute hidden gem, I'll say, just to put it mildly. I've used that exactly what we put out in that podcast to lead in a number of areas of my life with great success. So I will just tell you there's a lot out there for free. So G, talk us through, because we're going to go through how you can either meet, uphold, or raise standards. I'm just going to give people the examples, tell them where we're going up front. And you got to see this because you came in as a tadpole, at the bottom level, and there's so many levels to the teams.
Yeah, there's certainly levels within it. And before I jump into that, I just want to say, we've talked about standards before, really more specific. We are going to talk about 3 levels of standards today. But really what we're going to talk about is how you grow in those areas, how you lead other people in those areas, and really how standards work within an organization, because it's not just that you have them or you don't have them.
Right.
There are levels, and if you understand the levels, who plays what part, which people are at which levels, how you move people from one level to the other, it'll make it a lot easier for you to implement a great culture of standards in your organization. If you just think I have them, that's about as good as we have core values. Have you walked through our office?
Yeah.
We wrote it on the walls.
I have gym equipment too.
Yeah.
I don't use it, but I have it.
For sure. So that's really what we're going to get into today.
Right.
We will cover simple definition of standards, but we've taught on what a standard is. Today is going to be more so.
Yeah.
How do I do it in my...
Yeah. And so I'm sorry to interrupt you, G. Just to say for you guys, this is a episode, and I always kind of tee you guys up. This is a real practical wisdom episode. Sometimes we're deep on biblical knowledge. Sometimes it's very theological or it's blind spots. This is like a live well, godly wisdom applied to your life episode. And this isn't as heavy on scripture, but I will tell you that it's all backed and based on it. And there's a lot of what we're going to show you, but I just want to give you up front. This is a real wisdom episode.
So standards in the SEAL teams, it starts with SEAL training, right? Where you hear over and over again, meet the standard or go away. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it. But if you want to move forward, here's what's requested of you. They make it really simple. They're like, hey, buds is easy. Not a true statement. Or I would say only a half-true statement.
Right.
But they say all the time, buds is easy. Just be where we tell you to be on time, show up with the right gear, and do what I tell you to do, and you'll make it through training. It's that simple. You don't have to be smart to make it through SEAL training.
Right.
You just have to do what they tell you to do. So that's the first level. And then you get to a SEAL team, and you're like, oh man, like I did this, I did the hardest military training in the world, and so did everyone else at the team, and they've been there longer than you, and they've been downrange, and you haven't, and so it's like, man, I actually am not that great. I suck around here, and you realize like. Where in SEAL training and buds in these first couple of years, like, man, you're getting like pushed really hard and like they're pulling you up, like, here's what it takes to be a part of this place. And then you finally get there and you get to the next level and you feel like you're back in the student seat all over again. And there are people above you who really set the standard, show like, and uphold it. This is where it has to be. And as you grow, and I think it's one of the best parts of SEAL training, of the SEAL culture that I don't think very many people talk about, is how well they do growth and how well they do training, because they have such a great reputation since the 60s, and every 3 years they change out their leaders. How do they do that? Because they know how to make new leaders.
Yeah.
The one set of leaders goes up and out. At the very top, people are leaving the military. At the very bottom, people are joining the military. And this organization continues to just let people come in and let people go out, but the organization stays the same.
That's incredible.
And that's because they have a great understanding of standards being one of those things. And so there's like the second level of upholding it, where you've got the guys who like say, this is the bar, this is where you're going to get to. And then you have people at the highest level who are really dreaming, who are pushing a little bit further, who are, as we say, on the bleeding edge. They're the very tip of the spear, the ones pushing forward what it means to be a part of this brand. And I would say the SEAL brand has grown. It's been in decades at a time. But what it was in the 60s wasn't what it was in the 90s. And what it was in the early 2000s wasn't what it was in the 90s. And what it is today wasn't what it was in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
So it's continued to grow.
I think that's a lot because it was harder to get a spotlight view into things back in the 90s and early 2000s. But with social media and with all the various forms of communication that we have now, you can get your Goggins, you can get your Jockos, you can get your Garrett Unklebox, and like, no, but where you can hear people talk about it on a mass level and like videos and all that, which wasn't possible before. So I want G to kind of walk through that, because I think for most people, if you're being honest, and we're going to redefine standard just in case you've forgotten, because we have a very clear definition for it. But I think in life, you don't really get standards. You get rules, right? But like people will call rules standards. And let's just get into what's the difference between a rule and a standard?
The analogy I like to use on rules and standards that's easy for people to understand is, well, for one, standards are things that there's no value in breaking them. Rules are something that is generally a good guideline. You should follow rules when you can, but sometimes there's value in breaking them.
Right.
And jokingly, not joking, the speed limit is a great example of a rule. You should follow it. Now, sometimes there's value in breaking it.
Right.
The consequences don't go away just because you feel like you are merited in exceeding the speed limit. But sometimes when you exceed the speed limit, you would say the risk of getting a speeding ticket is worth the saved time. Right. That is an example. The rule didn't change and the consequences of the rule didn't change, but there's a time and a place to break them. Now, standards are things that there's never any value to be gained in breaking this. One of the standards in the SEAL teams, really simple standard, is never point your weapon at your teammate. Right? Shouldn't even be close, right? Not even questionably close to pointing your weapon at your teammate. There's no value that's ever gained from doing that. That only happens when you perform at a low level. Right. Right. And so there's a performance standard that you are always aware of where your barrel is pointed, no matter what. And if you do that, it's just because you're not good at your job and you have given us risk that had no merited value.
Right. And so with that understanding, like how many people could actually say like, oh, here's all the standards in my life?
A lot of people have rules.
That's exactly my point.
But standards are the things that you say, like, we never do this.
Right. Yeah, and that's right.
Like a good example of a personal standard in my life is I'll never raise my voice at my wife. Right. Unless I'm like yelling at her because she can't hear me. Like, look out. Yeah. Like I've never raised my voice at my wife in anger, and I never will, because there's no value to be gained in that. It is a risk that I took on because of my lack of emotional control. It's the only reason I would yell at my wife.
Right. And I would say that
she's not deaf.
Right. And I would say that very few people have that standard. And I think a lot of people, if they're hearing this for the first time, or even if they're hearing this for the fifth time hearing you say that, they're going, man, that's a hard standard. I don't even know if I could do that. Right. And that's the whole point I'm making. So you might have a rule where you're like, hey, I shouldn't raise my voice at my wife. And you're right. You shouldn't. But there will be times when you break that due to lack of discipline, lack of self-control, whatever it may be. And that's the point I'm making. To experience standards at the level you have is uncommon. And so what we would hope from this podcast and from just the whole of what we do is that you would have such a sense of purpose in your life and understanding who God's made you to be, that you would begin to intelligently and wisely implement standards in your life, and then there's a whole ladder that we're going to walk you up here.
The mix of standards inside of a culture, getting the standards right is not the entire culture,
Right.
but standards are like it's like the muscles of a culture. If you want to say like purpose is the skeleton, I would tell you that standards are the muscles, because a culture is a set of actions and attitudes common to a group of people.
Right.
Right. And so what like gives a little more meat to that is standards.
Right.
It's a clearly defined set of actions. We always do this.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's when you've got a set of clearly defined actions that people buy into, that has a big impact on the culture, which is what? A set of actions and attitudes common to a group of people.
Yeah. And so we defined standard. We said standards have three things. They're clear, they're intentional, and there's no benefit to breaking them. So just to say it that, and when we say clear, it's not subjective. It's like you said, never point your barrel at somebody. Well, what? No, never. Not like, I work out when I feel like it, never. Like they're very black and white.
I tripped. It was an accident. Doesn't matter.
Right.
You broke the standard.
Right.
Why'd you trip?
Yeah.
And if you did trip, why did you not control your barrel? And that's truly exactly what that situation looks like.
There's so much I love about that I'm going to go ahead and forego because I need to stay focused. So just a couple things before we dive into this. We're talking about these today in the context of a unit. Okay, this is not like standards that you're going to pull
whether
for
it's
yourself.
a business,
Right.
a family, a church,
Right.
A sports team, whatever. This is standards within a unit, because you're going to have personal standards. And again, we've talked about that. Listen to some of the episodes
Yep.
where we've talked about standards before. But today is going to be about, okay, what if I feel like I'm the leader of a team and I have standards, but we don't really have standards as a team? I
Yes.
feel like I've talked about them. What's wrong? What's happening
Right.
here? So how do I get people in each level of the standards, which we'll give you that framework today? How do I get people in each level to move up in that framework? What does that person need to think about? And how do I need to lead that person?
There you go. Very good. Okay, and just to let you know, like we said, it's meet, uphold, raise. You're going to hear us talk about that a lot.
What does it mean to meet the standard?
Right.
What does it mean to uphold the standard? And what does it mean to raise the standard?
Right. And just a little cautionary note, because we always like to give cautionary notes on the Impossible Life podcast. If you're out there and you're feeling super motivated about your organization, you don't get to just jump into being the standard raiser. There's a maturation process as far as how you interact with these. And so I just want to give that little tidbit. So if you're hearing this and you're feeling extra jacked today because you had 3 things of pre-workout, you don't just go, I'm a standard raiser. It's like, just listen. Okay. Second thing is, and this is a big one, we're going to give you a quick review. I'll link to this episode. We did a whole episode about motivation. So much of these standards are tied to your motivation. If you're a person, if you remember, our very bottom one was what I called the Polish turd, but you said polished turd, which is basically the person that just has
can't help but make a joke about anything. That's Nick Surface for you.
Look, man, you smiled and laughed. Okay, so
but yes, one of the prerequisites, okay, that you need to, if you haven't heard this before, we'll give it to you real quick. There's another episode to listen to. And for those of you who have heard it, quick reminder, this goes right in line with talking about standards and moving people up and moving yourself up through standards in your organization is the motivation pyramid. So let's just really quick review. 6 levels in the motivation pyramid. The polished turd, as I like to call him. A lot of these are terms from the military. The polished turd, his motivation is to not get fired. Right? Like that's a pretty low level of motivation. And a lot of times when I teach the motivation pyramid, I say, use this on yourself, right? Like you're somewhere on this motivation scale every time you go to the gym, right? Maybe you have the motivation to not get fired. And it's like, well, I'm just here. I'm just checking the box, right? The next level up, and you don't want to be at this level. Is the lowest level. Next level up is the gray man. The gray man was a person in the military who his goal was to not be noticed, right? I don't think I'm good enough to be the best. I just don't want to be. One of the sayings in SEAL training all the time is pays to be a winner.
Right.
Don't be last.
Right. Because
every time we did a race, whoever winners got a prize, last place everyone who didn't get first got a consequence. But last place always got an additional consequence. It'd be like, okay, we're doing a boat race really quick, which boat races are not fun. It's like sprints with the boat on your head.
Right.
So it's a big cardiovascular effort. But when you sprint you can run with the boats and keep them really steady, right? So they don't bounce on your head. But when you sprint, I mean, it's a phone book pounding you on the top of the head as you run, and you can't keep it smooth. And so we'll do a boat race. Winner, first one back, winner. You don't have to do the next boat race.
Right.
Okay. Everyone else who lost, you're going again. And the crew who lost, like the crew who was in last place, go get wet and sandy again. Boats on heads all the way to the water. I mean, boats hands overhead, right? Everyone else got the boat on their head.
Oh, man.
The crew who lost, they're going to, shoulder
Yeah.
press the boat up, take the boat all the way down, get wet and sandy really quick, bring the boat back at shoulder extension.
Yeah.
While everyone else is just standing there on the
they
line.
get to rest.
Yeah, with the boat on their head,
Yeah.
just standing there resting, while this crew gets some extra punishment. And then they get back to the line. It's like, okay, let's go again.
That's not fair.
Pays to be a winner.
Pays to be a winner.
Don't be last.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, so keep going, G. So that was the
Yeah.
gray man.
Sorry. Don't be last. Right. That's the gray man. The gray man's just saying, hey, I don't want to be last.
Hey, fourth place is good. They love
As
participation
long as there's
trophies.
5 people in
Right.
the race, 4th place is good.
Yeah.
Right. So moving up from there, gray man, that's level 4. Level 3 is the egotist. The egotist is, and a lot of people, you can go really far as the egotist, and a lot of people think the egotist is a great place to be, which is I'm better than the people around me.
Right.
It's competition.
Yeah.
Hey, competition is a strong force. You can go really far with that. But there's levels that go beyond that, because eventually the egotist will get you to a place where, one, it's some negative energy within you, because it can turn into like hatefulness and resentment. Like, that's, if your only force is in through beating others, it won't necessarily bring the best out of you.
Right.
It's better than that you weren't a competitor, but it won't bring the best out of you. And so let's talk about how you transition into the top half of the motivation pyramid, which is where the best comes out of you. So after the egotist is the optimist. The optimist says, hey, I just want to be better than yesterday.
Right.
That's great. Like, that's, instead of competing against others, I'm competing against myself. And as long as I'm better today than I was yesterday, that's really great. You're really improving. Now, the top 2 levels of the motivational pyramid next is the challenger, right? And this is someone who is wants to be the best version of themselves. Like, man, what's really possible? Like, I don't even want to be better than yesterday. I want to be the best that I can possibly be.
Right.
And then the very top is the master, and the master is pushing against reality. Like,
Right.
I want to expand. Like, people have said this isn't possible, and that's why it has to be done.
Right. Very, very good. Okay, so the reason we give all that, if you are a polished turd, I'm going to say it correctly, or a gray man, you're just never going to be bought in on standards, because it's always going to be about yourself and about sort of ducking out and doing the bare minimum.
The gray man says, what's the least I have
Yeah.
to do to meet the standard, and that's as far as I want to go.
Right. And this is not going to be the type of person that you can pull along. And it's interesting because the motivation is such a key part of this. And considering we're going to talk a lot about how to lead others in this and how to raise people up, you need to understand these. So I'm going to link, we did a full episode on that and went a lot more into it. So I'm going to link to that in the show notes so you can get into that. So we just wanted to make sure that you know, we're going to talk about motivation again as we go through these. But it's really important that you note that and you might be surprised that the egotist, which is I'm better than you, could be on this. But even that has its limits. Where you really want to roll is with the top half of the pyramid, which was optimist, maximizer, and master. So let's get into it then, G. So we're going to break down and like define each of these, because it may sound like meet, uphold, and raise might sound really obvious, but we're going to get into that, and then we're going to dive into how to lead, how to raise, and some of the key lessons at each of these. So very first up, G, is to meet the standard.
Yeah, meet the standard. This is obviously understandable. These are the people who are new into an organization. We're assuming a standard has been set around the organization, and they're being pushed or pulled up to get to that level.
Yeah.
They're not the ones necessarily driving the organization forward. The organization is pulling these people up.
Right.
SEAL training existed before I got there, and they put me in their funnel, and they said, let's see if you can keep up.
Yeah.
Right? They basically gave me the rope tied to the truck, and they said, let's see if you can hold on.
Yeah.
Right. And if I could hold, right, I wasn't pulling the truck forward. I was trying to hold on to the truck.
Right. And we want you to be able to assess both where you're at and where other people are at. People who are meeting the standard will say things like, I'm trying, and well, it should be this way, or like, why do we have to do this? These are common things that people that are at that meet the standard level say.
In the context, I won't get deep into this part today, but in the context of like, if you think about your organization is the truck, and we'll get to them in a second, but there's some guys in the front of the truck pulling the truck forward, and there's some people in the back with a rope behind the truck trying to hold on to the rope. You have to understand that the truck is going to keep moving. some organizations, they operate in a way where it's like when the people in the back are letting go of the rope, they'll just stop the truck over and over again. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but you can, when I look at organizations, I can tell what type of organization is let's just get more people on the rope. Let's try and get people in better shape before we get them on the rope. But the truck's going to keep moving. And then there's other organizations where the truck keeps stopping for the people in the back.
Yeah.
And neither is wrong, but you do different you run the truck or you run the organization in a different way based upon what you need.
Very good. We'll get more into that, by the way. All right, G. So that's meet. Uphold.
Uphold is the people who are really the ones saying, here's why the truck can't slow down.
Right.
Uphold is the people who understand, right? Standards are the things that we can never do. And when I was a student...
Never break.
Yeah. Right. These are things we never break these things. And when I was a student, they were yelling and screaming at me to force me to uphold the standard. And I can't say I always, as a student, always understood why. Now, later, when I grew and matured, I connected the enforcement of the standard to the lesson of the standard.
Right.
I was like, oh, I get it. Right. I understand why pool comp is so hard.
Right.
Because when I'm on a dive and my line gets sucked up by a boat and I have, a couple seconds to save my own life as my mouthpiece gets ripped out of my mouth and I'm drowning at this point, like, okay, I understand why pool comp is so hard.
Yeah.
Right. The training prepared you for what the real world is going to require. And the people who are upholding the standard, they're the ones who understand what the consequences of not meeting that standard are. When you can't see it, you're just being you're being whipped. You're being pushed to meet it. And you've got to have a level of desire and motivation to want to meet that standard. Otherwise, you won't ever get there. It's almost like a slave mentality where someone's trying to just constantly I don't want to be here. I feel like I have to be here.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're forced to be in a place with standards, man, you are a degradation to that culture. In a place with high standards, you need to have a desire hey, maybe I don't even understand all the standards, but I really like this place and I want to be a part of it, right? And so also, if you want to have great standards as an organization that are tough, you should create a culture that's desirable, that people want to pay the price to be a part of it. But the people who are upholding the standards, these are people who, for one, the standard isn't as hard for them. When you're trying to meet the standard, it's literally all you got. When you are upholding the standard, and we'll get into this more here in a second, but as you grow in upholding the standard, you're the type of person that, hey, the level of the standard is not my highest level.
Right.
But you help bring people along and you're able to communicate this is why the standard is so important. You really understand the purpose of the standard.
Yeah, and I want to interject here because we're going to apply this to places. Not everybody's going to go through the SEAL teams. We know that. But you are, at the very least, going to lead a family or lead a relationship. And what Garrett just described about the people trying to meet and uphold, in my mind, I'm just thinking so much about being a parent, about being the one who's upholding a standard and helping your kids to learn to meet different standards in your family. And so I'm sewing that into you right now because we're going to give more practical examples later on as we get into this. But just understand, this is not just good for the SEAL teams or good for a high-performing organization. I mean, you as the leader are leading what you're bringing up as a family, right? And in your relationship. So that this applies to that as a unit as well. All right, so very last thing, G, is to raise the standard. Right,
and so there's a base level of standard in the organization, and then there's also the ability to take it higher and take it higher. And I can tell you, in the time that I was there, from the time I was before and to the time after, the SEAL teams have not lowered their standards.
Right.
And in a culture where a lot of the military has, the SEAL teams have not. And then and I think it's also special because it's a place that attracts some of the best.
Yeah.
That there are the people there who under the conversation, or when a lot of the military was lowering their standards, it was the thing guys were screaming about the most.
Right.
Don't touch our standards. If you want to, and the conversation had a lot to do with allowing women into special operations. We said, we don't care. Let them try.
Yeah.
The truth was they did care, and the overwhelming majority of the SEAL teams said, we don't want women here. Congress said, anyways, we're going to allow them to try. There's been no women in the SEAL teams, but the things that guys cared about the most, there were reasons why they didn't want women, but the thing they really cared about was don't touch our standards.
Yeah.
They knew it was what made their organization what it was.
Yeah. One of our most often referenced and commented on videos on YouTube is when you talk about how there's no women in the SEAL teams, there's always that person who's like, this woman, and they'll link to an article. I'm like, they were a SWIC. They were something else. They were not an actual pinned SEAL. So just to back that up, yes, there's been women involved, but
it was 2016 that Congress said women can try in the SEAL teams. To this day, a woman has not made it to day one of buds.
So just capture that. Like there's different jobs that still require a lot of heavy, intense physical training that is not being a Navy SEAL, correct? Are you like SWCC? What does that stand for?
Special Warfare Combatant Craft Crewmen.
There you go. And what do?
They're like we call them the boat guys. They're the support guys that drive the boats. They get to do, honestly, I know a lot of great SWCC guys, and SWCC guys get to do a lot of the fun stuff that SEALs get to do. They just, when it comes to the mission, they're kind of in more of a support role than a lead role.
Right. So just to give some clarity on that. Okay. So understand that the standard raisers, and you were saying, G, so for people that raise the standards, they have that vision of what's possible and the wisdom to know the standard that should be.
They're seeing why, because again, with the backbone or the other side of the coin of a standard is why.
Yeah.
Why do we have this? And so the people who raise the standard, if you are trying to raise the standard and you don't understand why, like think about organizationally in a business, the standard may, like where a lot of people talk about standards in an organization is their sales team.
Yeah.
And they're trying to get everyone in their sales team to meet the standard,
right?
Like quota, sell this much, make this many calls. And you've got people who would say they're the ones raising the standard, business owners, sales team leaders, whatever. And they're just saying, we should just do more.
Right.
Like, just do more. And if you are constantly trying to raise the standard and you can't connect the why,
right.
the only why that the sales team sees is y'all make more money, right? And if you're on a good sales team, that means you make more money too. But that's not enough why to make people give all that they have.
Right.
And so a person who's great at raising the standard can clearly communicate and articulate, this is why we're doing it and this is why we should do it. This is the greater purpose. That's more than just making money.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's where so many people fall down because they assume that greed is like, oh, well, why wouldn't you want more? And it's like at some point people are like, I got enough, right?
Yep.
You're not just going to...
Well, when we've talked about purpose for a business before, the analogy I like to use is building a castle versus fighting dragons.
Right, very good.
When a business is purely about making money, it's about building a castle. And people they'll come work on your castle for you. You just got to pay them. You'll pay for every brick in the castle. But when your organization is more about killing a dragon, that's when people who will be like, yeah, I don't like that dragon either.
Yeah.
That dragon attacked me. That dragon burned down my brother's farm. I'm coming with you. I want to help kill that dragon. And that's where you'll get people that will give all of themselves and are willing to not just meet the standard, but begin to uphold it and move up the line and even raising it. It's like, man, I want to try harder to kill this dragon.
Yeah. I think they would call that purpose-led organizations, right? Is the popular term. So the one thing I want to say about the standard raisers, and you'll see why, this is rare. This is like, you can't just kind of be like, hey, I think I'm going to be a standard raiser. This is rare. And there's been some famous examples. I would say Elon Musk is a great modern day example of a standard raiser as far as challenging reality and really saying, hey, here's what's possible.
Well, and he can clearly articulate all of it to his why.
Yeah, big time.
Which his why is advanced human civilization.
Right.
Right. Let's get off of planet Earth. Let's become a intergalactic, then interstellar race,
right?
And we've got to get off of Earth, which means like, hey, our technology needs to get a little bit better. And when you get focused on really big things like that, the little stuff doesn't bother you so much,
right? And so I use him as an example because I think I want to. There's plenty of people who raise standards that aren't famous, but when you see a famous one, I think it helps you paint the picture. Steve Jobs would be another great example of a guy who came along and said like, okay, this is what the paradigm is. We got a bunch of buttons on phones. We're putting more buttons on phones. They're unfolding so you can have a full keyboard on a phone. Hey, let's take all the buttons off. And there's this story I love about him where he was there was the guy who was working on one of the applications for the original iPhone, and he was lower level in the organization, didn't know that Steve Jobs even knew who he was. And one day he got a phone call from Steve Jobs, and he's like talking to him about this application. The guy's like, oh, wow. Like Steve Jobs is calling me. And he didn't call to talk about like the functionality or what it was going to serve. He was looking at the font. And he was challenging him back and forth about like, hey, the font and the color on this is wrong. And like the reason he was saying is because he was so moved to create a feeling. Like everything about Apple, if you open up a box from Apple, it's a premium experience, man. That cardboard slides off. It's all glossy finish. The box itself feels like it's something better than what most of my kids' toys are. You know what I mean?
They nail it on the packaging.
Yeah.
What Apple has always been over Microsoft is it feels like unquestionably, if like Apple machines are cooler, you feel better using them.
Yeah, you feel like premium. They understood that, and that's what I mean. You're not going to get into that level if you don't you don't have a great vision. I mean, to sit there, most people would just kind of be like font and color. okay, let's just kind of like make sure we have a good one. But for him, it was like, no, we need the exact font that's going to fit in with the feel of what we're trying to create, and the color needs to nail it. Now, if you know anything about color theory, you'll understand why he would be into that. I'm not going to get into color theory, but it matters. And every brand that you follow, they are into color theory. So anyways, let's get more into this now, G, and to show people. So we're going to talk about how to raise it, how to lead people in it, and some of the keys in each one.
Yeah, we'll talk about each level: meet, uphold, and raise. And in meet, let's start here. We're going to talk about how you let's go. I'll put myself in the shoes. Like I'm a student in Buds.
Great.
Okay. And so the first way we're going to talk about meet the standards is to you, like individually, not how do you lead people who are in that zone, but when you're in this zone, what you need to do. One of the big things that's going to happen for you is taking some ownership and responsibility of like, man, like I have to become a part of this organization. I remember making the shit like as a student, like day one of SEAL training, I feel like, man, they're just like yelling at me because like that's just what it is. Like it's they're yelling at me because it's supposed to be hard. And it's true, it's supposed to be hard. But standards are not for exercise.
Right.
Okay. Like you do exercise for the purpose of getting stronger, but the standards in an organization aren't just like this is just a dumbbell that we're going to pick up and put down over and over. It doesn't actually, when you go to the gym and lift weights, it makes you stronger, but it doesn't do anything else. Right? That's not what standards are. They're not there just for you to exercise on. They have a purpose to them. And when you're in this zone of meeting the standard, you slowly make this shift. Because I remember on day one, I was like, yeah, man, like they're just telling us we got to get up early because they want it to be hard. And all these, I could go on, all these little things. As I went along in the program, I started to think like, man, maybe it's like this for a reason.
Right.
Maybe they're so meticulous with our gear, not just because they're trying to make me miserable, but because I should actually be this way.
Right.
Right. In any organization, excellence, when you like put excellence down to your team, they're going to be like, man, it's hard to do it this way.
Yeah.
You mean I have to show up earlier? You mean I have to go through my checklist every time? I mean, the equipment worked last time. Can't we just assume that it's going to work again? Absolutely not. Every time you will get here and you will run through your checklist on your equipment. I was a comms guy. Right. And any time like my gear did not work, everyone was just like, you're just a giant bag of crap. We hate you. Right. And I would go through my checklist every single time. Sometimes comms equipment just doesn't work the way that it's supposed to, but it forced me to like be on top of my stuff. I had to be able to, I got to a place where I could always I could say like, I've done everything I can do to make this work. And if it doesn't work, I can tell you why. And if it doesn't work, I know what to do.
Right.
Never did my comms equipment fail. And I'm running around like, oh, well, I didn't check beforehand. So hold on, let me check these two things really quick. I always knew. Right. It wasn't just like, hey, we're going to give you this rote memorization work. We're going to give you this arduous checklist. No, you have to, when you're in this zone of, hey, I'm in the zone of meeting the standards. And how do I grow in this? Well, the growth is really connecting to like the ownership and the responsibility of it, really seeing the value of why meeting this standard helps move the organization forward. It's not just for me, it's for everybody. One of the biggest lessons they teach you in SEAL training is that your your choices affect other people. The consequences of your choices affect other people.
Yeah, that's so good, man. And so you talked about that identity shift and like the ownership and responsibility shift of understanding like, okay, this is on me. And that's how you start to raise up to be a standard meter, right?
It is an identity shift all through like meet until you get to uphold. Right. When you get to uphold, and we'll talk about uphold here more in a second. When you get to uphold, the identity is very like when you're a platoon leader in the SEAL teams, you realize like, man, this place hinges on me.
Right.
There's officers and master chiefs and all those people. But if I don't run this unit correctly, like I'm the one out here pressing the buttons on the field. I'm the one leading the unit. If I don't do my job, it doesn't matter how good the people in the office look.
Right.
Right. And you take ownership of that, and you realize like, I'm the one that's at the tip of the spear. You get to a place where you're no longer being pulled along in an organization. You're the one pushing it forward.
Right. And I think there's a lot of context to family, but before we kind of apply it to the family area, talk about how to lead.
Yeah. So if you are leading persons, group of people that are in the meet the standard category, one of the things that you got to talk about all the time is why.
Yeah.
When I was a squad leader, so in charge of 8 other SEALs, when I was a squad leader, I would always, I told my guys all the time, ask me why whenever you want. I'm going to be clear with you what I want from you, but you can always ask me why. And sometimes the why was not a good answer, but it was a true answer.
Right.
Sometimes the why was, it's like, why do we have to rebuild the boats? We built the boats last week. There's nothing wrong with the boats. Why do we have to rebuild them? It's like a 3-4 hour process of, because you put, there's like the rubber Zodiac, but there's all this rigging that goes with it. And like they age over time. It's wear and tear to rebuild a boat, but it lasts more than a week. They'll last for a while. It'll last a couple months when you put a boat together and rig it really well. But sometimes I'd be like, well, we're going to rebuild the boats today. It's like, we rebuilt the boats last week. Why are we having to do this? Well, because Chief told Master Chief that we were going to rebuild the boats because Master Chief had said, his boss is going to come watch our training operation, 2 nights from now, and you guys better look tight on your stuff. And so Chief just said, yeah, well, we're rebuilding our boats this week to make sure we're at our best. Did we need to rebuild the boats? No. Chief said we would because he's trying to do his job well.
Right.
And so you know what we're going to do? We're going to rebuild them. I don't have a good why for you other than that. But I would always answer the question. Sometimes they would ask me why, and I'm like, I'm so glad you asked.
Right.
Let me tell you why this is extremely important. If you don't understand why we do this, today's a great lesson for you. I'm glad you asked.
Yeah.
But we would always talk about why. And when you understand why, it's like, why do you have to do your checklist? Because the one time you don't is when you're going to get busted. And if your radios don't work correctly, that can seem like a small thing, but it can break a mission on the battlefield.
Very good.
And so I can talk to people at any level underneath me and say, here's why what you do is so important. And that'll help you make the shift. That'll help them make the ownership shift. Like, man, like you've entrusted me with this task.
Yeah.
If I do this, that's really what happens to the organization when I just do my part well. We're that that's how great it is when you do your job. And so connecting people to the why behind what they do, that's what, when you're in the uphold the standard category, you're helping people realize like, hey man, when you're back there behind the truck, you're actually slowing us down.
Right.
Like we're just trying to get you on pace with us here. But if you could get at the front of the truck and help us push this thing, that would be so much better.
Right. And where I think you see this more than, as in my personal example, if you're a leader of any kind, and once again, at the very least, you lead yourself, but you will grow to lead. If you're a man, you're going to lead your wife, you're going to lead your family. And if you're a mom or whatever, you're leading your kids. You are going to, like, kids are the chief askers of why. It's their favorite question. And growing up, my least favorite answer, my parents did a lot of things right, but my least favorite answer was because I said so. I vowed when I had kids I would never tell my kids because I said so, because in my experience, that's the quickest way to just make it feel like drudgery. And so to your point, this is going to challenge your leadership because you're going to have to really think about why. Because if your why is purpose-led, you're going to be able to explain it, and people are, even if they don't respect it, as kids get older, they'll start to understand it. But if it's preference-based, like, why do we do this? Because I don't like that. Well, that's not really a great answer.
Well, Grace is just now at an age where she's really starting to, like, we can have a real conversation.
Yeah.
And she'll ask a lot of follow-up questions. And she's helped me realize, like, a good understanding of when why is okay and when why is not okay.
Right.
Because, to a 4-year-old, you'll say, like, you can't have something. And then the next question is why.
Right.
And if you're asking me why with a whiny attitude, all I'm going to say is because I said so.
Right.
Right. Because you're saying, why can't I have it?
Right.
Right. Like, why can't I have what I want? And that's because that's the way life is. That's the end of that loop. Right. But if you're asking why, like, help me I want to know, like, why can't I eat candy whenever I want? Well, because, and we'll have a nutrition conversation.
Right.
Right. And so the attitude that you're having around why does have a big impact on what kind of answer you're going to get.
Right.
And that's something you have to lead in. Right. Like I'm like, Grace, I understand why you're asking why, and it's not for the right reason. Right. Now.
And I will say, just because Grace is 4, I've got 5, 10, and 12 in my house. And so right now I have a little bit of the section you're talking about. And then I also get to see what happens when it matures. And the test for you as a leader here, as far as being the standard upholder, is can you actually be consistent over time? Because what I'm seeing now, specifically with my 12-year-old, but my 10-year-old's also starting to show a lot of it, they're starting to get it. Yeah. Like my 12-year-old literally this morning was like, hey, I was reading that scripture on honoring your parents. And so she just, like, sent us really nice, like, incredible messages to get from your kid. And I was reading this thing and I was like, man, how many times have we talked about how to show honor? It's one of our family core values. Right. We've talked about it around the dinner table every night for the past however many years. And it's like, now you're starting to see it. Now I'm starting to see her start to click and get it. And that's the challenge. For a kid, it's going to be a slower, longer process. But if you're in an organization like a church, or if you're in a place like a business or whatever it is, you're going to have to speak into purpose. But this is where it's like, for you as a leader, the better you are at understanding why and connecting like, this is the standard and this is what we're doing and this is why, the more that it kind of gets people like, okay. Like, I love whenever I'm a tribe leader in Mighty Men, when we're there on like a Sunday afternoon, which is totally inconvenient, and we're scraping the stage off for the Christmas play. Every year we scrape up our stage and we put down a new one. And my tribe
like
seems to get
the covering.
Yeah, the covering of the stage. It's manual labor. And what I say,
it's like the decking.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. You're scraping up the deck so that you have a nice, clean, fresh one. And then what I say to them is I go, man, you know what, guys? A bunch of people are going to give their lives to Jesus whenever they watch this play, and not one of them is going to think like, hey, I wonder who put down that stage. And I just go, but thank God there's some men who are willing to pay the price and know that the work that they do matters.
It's kind of like comms, where like no one's grateful when you get it right. No one looks at a good polished stage and like, man, like, somebody clean that stage. Yeah. But when you don't, everyone notices.
That's exactly right. Like, man, this stage looks awful. And that's what I say. It's like, thank God there's some men who are willing to pay the price. And that's what I mean. With older adults and whoever, you can get good at painting the picture as a leader to see the vision of like, hey, this is why it matters. And so that's the lesson, is that at the meat stage is to connect people to purpose. And the better you are at that, the more they're going to, like Garrett said, want to help you slay the dragon, want to uphold the standard. Or you can just beat them and see how far that gets you. I would not recommend it. So
the team might keep getting smaller.
Yeah, it's a great way to have some attrition. Anyways, all right, G. So that's meat. So uphold. How are we going to raise people in uphold?
So again, we'll do the same thing, talking to you in first person, and then talking to you if you're leading these people.
Right.
So we talked about if you're meeting the standard, here's what you need to think about. If you're leading people in that zone, here's how you help them.
Correct.
Right? Now talking about uphold the standard. If you're in this zone, here's what you need to focus on. If you're upholding, that means you've already met and you've been through the transition that we talked about in meeting the standard, where you begin to connect the why. I understand why we do this. If you're in the uphold the standard category, you're already past that point. And so how do you grow here? Well, it is specifically you grow in like your personal strength and ability. Mm-hmm. When you're in the uphold the standard category, the level of the standard should not be your max rep.
Right.
It should be like half speed for you is what meeting the standard looks like. Because like literally when I was in SEAL training, one of the physical standards is a 4-mile timed run. One of the physical standards is a 2-mile swim. The 2-mile swim started at 85 minutes, goes all the way down to 65. 4-mile timed run started at 32 minutes, goes all the way down to 27 minutes. And you must be able to do this. Now in the running, I could barely meet the standard, right? From a physical perspective, that's really just where Garrett was. And I had a great swim buddy. The guy that I would do my 2-mile swims with, he would come and run with me. And he was a great runner. Like running a 27-minute 4-mile for him was easy because he could run a 24-minute 4-mile.
Right.
So he could decide that day, like, how hard do I want to push? For Garrett, a 27-minute 4-mile was a max rep.
Right.
Like, this is the best of what I have to offer. And my swim buddy could get next to me, like literally would run next to me, like trying to pace me. I'm just like max. It's hard to pace when you're at max effort.
Right.
Because pacing is somewhat of a mental calculation.
And you guys don't have watches.
You're not allowed to run with a watch. He would pace me, yell at me, and then sometimes like he had a really good mind for pace because he had trained for years as a runner. He had a really good mind for pace, and he could tell when we were slipping. And if running next to me and yelling at me wasn't enough, sometimes he'd put his hand in my back and push me. And so if you realize that, like, he was running at the standard level, he's running at a pace to say, like, we're going to get there at 26:50, right? We're going to meet the 27. And he had enough energy left over to yell at me, to encourage me, to literally push me and drive with extra energy. And what was cool was it was the opposite on the swim. He was me on the run. He could barely meet it, and I was just you're not really yelling in the water, but there was a lot of just dragging. I would
because you guys have a rope that you're tied to.
You have a web on the 2-mile swim. You're not roped together. Okay. We do that on dives. But on the swim, you have a web belt that has like your knife and your smoke on it, and it's a really sturdy belt around your wetsuit. And I would just grab onto his web belt and kick extra, right? He'd push me on the run. I'd push him on the swim. But the point being, in the category where like when in the uphold the standard zone, you have enough strength to do more than the standard.
Right.
Because you've got to be someone who can literally run to the back of the boat or run to the back of the line, push the guys, and try and push them back up to the front. It's one thing to be able to just meet the standard with all your energy. It's a whole nother thing to have enough extra energy to go help drive people forward.
Right. So you said, I mean, what you're saying is you got to grow in strength of both, I would say mental and also in your EQ, right? Like you talked about, it's like your care and love has to grow as well.
Well, that's, that's when you are when you're the one leading in that zone.
Right.
Right. When you're the person growing and upholding the standard, you just got to grow in your personal strength. And yeah, one of those extra skills is also having great EQ and dealing with people, because most of the times what the standard elements in an organization look like are not physical standards.
Exactly.
Of like a run and a swim. The standards are more so about work performance, level of commitment, showing up on time, quality of work, whether it's the things that you write, whether it's, equipment, whatever it is. And so it means you've got a lot of personal interaction going on.
Yeah.
And so in the way that in coaching people, because it's literally what you're doing in an organization, if you're the one upholding the standard, you're trying to get people up to that level.
Right.
It means you're coaching people. And, again, on a run, coaching someone is pushing them in the back, telling them to pick their chin up, giving them, cues and reminders. In the workplace, it's not a physical effort, but it is a conversation.
Right. So to raise up, you have to grow in those things because in order to lead, you're going to be the one.
If you don't have the physical strength, if you don't have the running stamina, you can't push anybody as a runner. If you don't have the EQ and leadership skills, you can't help coach anybody forward.
Yeah. And one of those big things, for EQ, we've done an episode on emotional quotient as well. But like you have to understand what motivates people, right? And be able to speak to those things. That's why we said EQ. You have to have a lot of care and love, which means you're paying attention to them, which means you actually see, okay, this is what moves this person.
EQ is the gifted part of Eisenhower's leadership quote.
Right.
Getting them to want to do it.
Right.
Right. That to get someone to want to do it, not everybody wants the same things. And so if you want to get everyone to want an organization to win, it's not the same conversation to every person in the organization. You got to understand that they're a little bit different.
Yeah.
As Henry Ford said,
very good.
I tried to hire a pair of hands and said I got the whole person. Maybe everyone's got the same size. Everyone who wears a large glove is not the same type of personality,
big time.
right? And so I've got to learn how to work with individuals differently. That's the skills that you're going to grow in. When you're in the uphold the standard category, or for us at Mighty Men, these are the guys who are the team leaders, right? I'm really trying to get a bunch of guys to meet the standard of what it means to be a Mighty Man. That's me having a personal relationship with each of them, and the way that each person moves forward might be a little bit different.
Yeah.
It'll grow you as a leader.
Yeah, very good. And so to lead, you have to motivate and remind people, right? It's going to be a lot of what you just talked about.
This is the hard lesson, and you'll be you can be a very, very high level leader and spend the majority of your life, and not wrongly, spend the majority of your life in the uphold the standard category. Because the last piece of really when you're leading others and upholding the standard, one of the last pieces that you learn is really what's the appropriate amount of grace.
Right.
And so let me give a good example. Right, like for the one who's upholding the standard, you got to have a level of strength to deal with people in the boat who aren't pushing the boat forward.
Right.
You got to be able to outpush they're pulling the boat back, you're pushing it forward, and you got to have the strength to outpush their pull. Right, they're pressing the brake, you got to have more gas than they have brake, and that requires a level of strength in you as a leader. And God, think about how much strength God has, all of it. Right. But even still, with the Israelites, there was a time where he said, that's enough.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Right? Because there was so much grace that God had and then he finally said, you guys can't do it. I have to fix it. And so there was grace upon grace upon grace, but he did still finally make a shift in the way that the great organization of God and his people, he made a shift in how it was done. And that was because it's not that God couldn't do anything, but he made the change. He doesn't have a limited amount of strength. We have a limited amount of strength as human leaders. And so I say that to say that even God had to shift the way the organization was run. Even with a great amount of grace, eventually he had to change the operation. And the same is true when you're the leader, really pushing others and upholding the standard. You have strength, but it is finite. And you only have so much grace to use. What does grace do? Grace allows people to get back up and try again.
Right.
Grace allows people to man, you're not helping this organization at all, but we'll keep coaching you. Grace is what allows for that. Where there is no grace, it's essentially the SEAL pipeline.
Right.
It's a zero grace program.
Yeah.
Meet the standard or go away. And I'm not saying organizations should run that way. They're just an example of the extreme.
Right.
That's a zero grace program.
Mm-hmm.
Mighty Men, for example, I would say is like a high grace program.
Yeah.
Right. Like if we don't leave, you're not going to graduate this year, but still be here with us and try again next year. And there's a high amount of grace, but there is still a standard because it protects the value of what the organization is and what it accomplishes, literally what it means to earn a Mighty Men shirt.
Right.
Right. And so there's a lot of grace, but there is still a limit. And the hard lesson that you're learning in the person who's upholding the standard is how much grace is the right amount.
Right. Yeah, that's good. For those of you that don't know, because I know we constantly feel like we're getting a lot of new listeners, Garrett and I help lead a group at church called Mighty Men. We have a path, which has some requirements, has some very clear standards on it.
We have over 400 guys that meet every Saturday.
Right.
This year we had over 300 men commit to an annual discipleship path.
Right. And part of that discipleship path is if you complete everything, then at the end you get your Mighty Men shirt. We have a graduation ceremony.
It is not an earn your salvation program.
Correct. And honestly, you know what your reward is for completing the year of the path? You get to go again.
Yeah.
Because that's what you and I do every year. We're still on the path every single year. And so it's just an ongoing discipleship process, but we put some very clear definitions around it. That's so just in case you didn't realize. And Garrett's right. Every year there's a guy who's like, man, I couldn't do this because of X, Y, Z. And it's up to you as the leader, even when by definition you're like, well, by definition you agreed to this and you failed. But it's like, I'm going to listen to what you're saying. I'm going to look at the body of work, and I'm also going to just prayerfully consider it, because sometimes it's like, no, the right thing here is to push this guy through, because he really was like, it's the heart of what it is to be a disciple, not like the black and white. And thank God doesn't hold us to the black and white.
Yeah. So the big lesson in the leadership of upholding, if you're leading other people in their uphold the standard zone, it's helping them grow and develop, so again, so that they can pull and lead other people, but then also understanding, teaching how much grace is the right amount of grace for the people who are in the meet the standard category. Because it's the ones who are the uphold the standard people are the ones who are really determining, this person makes the cut, this person doesn't make the cut. And so it's knowing what's the right amount of grace.
Yeah, so good. Okay, so I'm going to recap real quick, G. So we said meet, the real keys was connecting to purpose. For uphold, the keys are strength and EQ development, okay, and coaching. And then the last one is raise. And I'm going to give the keys in advance here because this is the rare one. It's vision and wisdom are the keys here, and you'll see why.
And so with each of the phases of a standard before this, we talked about, here's what you need to know if you're in that zone, and here's how you lead people in that zone. Well, raise the standard's a little bit different.
Yep.
No one's going to lead you into this place.
Right. You can't pull other people up either.
Yep. This is because it's the top of the motivation pyramid.
Right.
This is the master.
Yeah.
This is the challenger or maximizer, the person who's wants to be the best of themselves or even wants to push and challenge reality. And that's so, like Nick said, the keys here, you're only going to lead yourself into this place. No one's going to lead you there. And what you're going to be constantly working on and learning there is, number one, is vision. You have to see what's possible. Not how hard could we make a standard, but what kind of great purposes could a standard serve?
Right.
Right. When you see a bigger purpose, you'll start to think, okay, well, if that would to do something like that, it would require these type of standards. And it's wisdom to navigate the path to do that. I can look at an organization and if I math out and connect its standards and purposes, and our organization runs well when the standards are very efficient, meaning the least amount of standards possible to accomplish the purpose. It's already going to be hard. Don't make it harder than it has to be.
Yeah.
Right. It's really drive all of the effort towards the purpose and get rid of any roteness or arbitrariness, because all that does, it's just wasted money, right? It's wasted time. It's wasted effort, right? You want all of your effort to be useful. You want all of your effort to be connected to the purpose. And so when you're in the raise the standards category, let me make an example. In a business organization, a lot of times the standard raising is the sales organization, right? That's where people, if you've been in the corporate world, where you've heard standards is around sales. Hey, we have a standard quota. How many calls you make, how much you close per quarter or per month or whatever it is. And, if you're the sales team leader, maybe you're in the uphold the standard category where you have no problem meeting the quota and you're trying to help other people meet the quota. And you got people who are in the meet category and they're I'm just trying to meet my quota for this year. That's where they're at. And then the boss, business owner or the board, depending on the size of the organization, is the one's hey, let's just raise the sales quota again. Let's raise the sales quota again. Let's just keep growing and growing and growing. And if you think that's really what the raise the standard is about, like how much juice can we squeeze out of this thing, eventually your organization will run into a roadblock. You won't be able to grow anymore. And you're trying to squeeze the juice out of immature lemons in the bottom of your meet the standard category, and you will get stuck. You will plateau. So it's the person who is raising the standard has to have the vision for what's possible, but also the wisdom to navigate how to do that, right? Like one of the things I've had to learn being someone who has grit, and I'm not saying that to like just put myself up on a pedestal, but a lot of leaders have grit.
Right.
If you listen to this podcast and you lead a team of people, you have some measure of grit. Mm-hmm. And what you've got to realize is that not everyone has the same amount of grit that you do. And so sometimes you can't drive the organization at the pace that you would like to drive it at.
I'd say all the time.
Yeah. That sometimes moving forward means slowing down. Yeah. Right. I've got to regroup the team. I've got to help prepare them better. If I wanted to take the team up the mountain faster, maybe I should have prepared them more before they got to the mountain. Right. Not just, hey, why can't you keep up with me?
Yeah.
And so that's why it's two parts of the raise the standard category. One, it's seeing what's possible and seeing a reason for why we should climb this mountain or why we should climb it so fast. But it's also the wisdom to navigate your team in that process.
Yeah, I love that. I heard a practical example, and this is something that you wouldn't really think of as a standard, but like if you know the company Snapchat, my wife actually directed me towards this a podcast with this guy, and Snapchat was like, when it came out, it was like revolutionary. It was the first people that really take augmented reality. You could have all these face filters. They were doing it before anybody was doing that. And one of the standards they have at Snapchat is that day one, you have to pitch a new idea to the whole team. Now,
nice.
The reason they do that is because Snapchat's actually a very small team. It's full of creativity. And what keeps people back from being creative? Fear. So they have them come in, and people always suck whenever they do their idea.
But if you do it on day one, I already know where you're going with this. It's so that you can make a meaningful contribution to the organization.
Because now it's out of the way. Yeah. Right? It's like, hey, guess what? That was horrible, and you'll never have to be afraid about giving a horrible pitch because it's already happened.
Be your worst pitch or you're fired.
Right? Well, no, that's not. But the point he was making is like creativity is really the juice that they have to squeeze for what's possible. And if you're afraid that you're going to say something that people aren't going to like, it's like, no, it's not going to all be gold. And I just thought, I was like, that's a very, and they do it, it is a standard. It's like day one, you're pitching. Mm-hmm. And so I just thought that was a really interesting pitch tied to purpose. All right, G. So the lesson there is vision and wisdom once again. And once again, you're not going to, not everyone's going to be in there. One of the connections, and we're going to wrap up here, that I had beforehand is sometimes like you would think, you talked about how what's going to help you reach that, raise the standard is you have the source of infinite energy, which is
you've got to
love.
get connected to something big.
Yeah.
Again, if the leader at the top, and I was making that as like a simple wrong illustration of like, hey, let's just sell more, let's just make more. That works up until it doesn't.
Yep.
Right. That's the running from pain, running towards pleasure.
Yeah.
The infinite path of running towards purpose. There's fuel that you can get in life that'll make you just want more and more and more. Just like when we've talked about Maslow's hierarchy before, as you move through all of these phases of things that you want in life, well, if you can't breathe, you want air really bad. If you're dying of dehydration, you want water really bad until you get some, then you don't want any more. You want food until you're not hungry anymore, and then you don't want any more. And even money, there's a level of money that you get to, and you're like, well, I guess more money is great, but 30 cheeseburgers isn't really any better than 20 cheeseburgers.
Right.
It's already more than I need.
It's already too much.
It's already a lot.
Right.
But the very top of Maslow's hierarchy, because that's the way every level works, except for the very top, what Maslow called self-actualization, what we call purpose, is instead the more you get of it, the more you desire it.
Yeah.
And so when you're the person who's raising the standard of an organization, you should be tasting that, and you've got to help other people in your organization taste it.
Yeah.
It's the vision and the wisdom to come back down to the lower levels of the organization and make them dream about what's possible. What if we could be this? What if we could serve God in this way? What if our business could solve problems in the market this way? What if our family could operate in this way? This is the conversation I've had with my wife many times about our family. This is the conversation I've had with many organizational leaders. This is the conversation I love to have with our leaders at Mighty Men. Here's what we could be in the future. And when you can begin to dream about what's possible and connect it back to your daily action, that's how you become someone who raises the standard.